Versatile, tough, and always outspoken, Thurman Thomas is undoubtedly one of the greatest running backs to play the game. In a career spanning 13 seasons, this five-time Pro Bowler led the Buffalo Bills to 4 straight Super Bowls, was named the NFL's MVP in '91, and retired as the league's 9th-ranked rusher with 12,074 yards. But statistics only begin to tell the story of Thurman Thomas's NFL career, which began with the 1988 draft and a demoralizing snub by teams that were spooked by a knee injury he sustained in his senior year at Oklahoma State. Despite his status as the Big Eight's rushing leader, at 5'9", 195 pounds, Thomas slid to the second round as team after team passed until the Buffalo Bills called.
Our running backs coach, a great running back himself, Elijah Pitts, had kept drumming at us and drumming at us. Thurman Thomas is the guy we want. He convinced us. It was a gamble.
You can get drafted in the first round, you can get drafted in the last round, but until you prove yourself on that football field, that's when you know that you've made it in the National Football League.
There are so many things that people look at Thurman Thomas can point out: his running ability, how he goes about, making a cut into the hole, or, really setting up a linebacker to make a miss, or coming out of the backfield, the great pass routes that he runs. But from my standpoint, one thing that separated Thurman Thomas from just being that great all-purpose running back was his attention to details.
I wanted to be a player that was capable of doing everything that I wanted to do on the football field. Studying film, conditioning myself to where I'm exhausted. I was kind of a guy who, even though Jim Kelly was a quarterback, I felt like I could have called a plays. That's how prepared I was.
He was never a look-at-me guy. If you relieved him and took him out for a few downs and send in Kenny Davis, you'd give Kenny a pat in the back and be ready to go back in.
I didn't want a guy that can just hand off the ball and run straight forward, north and south all the time. I wanted a guy that was a game breaker. Thurman Thomas had it all.
With characteristic boldness, number 34 entered his second season determined to turn up the heat.
On his feet at the 20, at the 15, down to the 10-yard line, breaking down to the 5, and in for the touchdown.
Feisty and vocal with the press, his comments were sometimes controversial.
We were at each other's heads a few times because we all wanted to win. It wasn't just me and Thurman. It was me, Thurman, Andre. We had a bunch of egos on the team.
That's when we started going to the championship game. That's when we started going to the Super Bowls. Because we came together as a team instead of bickering back and forth at each other.
Thomas played 194 games with the Bills and racked up staggering numbers along the way. But breaking the record of one of the NFL's most legendary players in history lingers prominently in his memory.
I think the statistic that I'm most proud of is that I led the National Football League for 4 straight years in total yards from scrimmage. Anytime you break a record of Jim Brown's, you know that you've accomplished something.
Thurman runs, breaks a tackle, goes in for the touchdown. Thurman Thomas has scored.
But for this multifaceted powerhouse who enjoyed tremendous success, there was one elusive goal never conquered.
People always say, well, the Bills are losers because they lost 4 Super Bowls in a row. But I think overall, we accomplished a lot. To be the best team in the AFC for 4 straight years, go to 4 straight Super Bowls, that's never been accomplished. We turned it around. We put Buffalo on the map.
Still on his feet at the 20, gets down to the 15, the 10, the 5, and scores.
But after 12 seasons, this all-time rushing leader for the Bills was cut in a salary cap move in '99. Surprised and hurt, Thomas responded by signing with arch-rival Miami. But before he could complete a full season, a torn knee ligament sidelined him, this time for good. Not long after, he signed a symbolic one-day contract to retire with a team that recognized his prodigious talent from the start.
To Thurman Thomas, we say welcome and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
I tell you, this guy, I don't know, we forgot his name. The guy who was supposed to be here, Stabler.
Ken Stabler? Yeah, that's my buddy there, yeah.
Did your paths ever cross his? Stablers?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, years ago.
Yeah?
Years ago, definitely. I've been to Alabama a couple of times to do a couple of golf tournaments with my buddy Cornelius Bennett and happened to run into Kim Stabler a bunch of times. So definitely a guy who, he's the snake.
Yeah.
What can you say? When you have a name like that, everybody knows you. And so just a guy who, as growing up, going against Pittsburgh and all the great rivalries they had against the Steelers, just a guy that you admired coming out of college and playing in the pros, and probably a guy that should be someday in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Well, congratulations on your entry to the Football Hall of Fame. When you were growing up, what was your team?
My team actually was the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, even though growing up in Houston, I was a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, only from the simple fact that Mean Joe Green was from Texas,
right.
and I followed his career when I was little. And but obviously, growing up there, I also had to follow Earl Campbell.
Yes.
And I wasn't a big Houston Oilers fan, but Earl wore 34, and he's the reason why I wore 34. But Mean Joe Green was the reason why I grew up a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and my stepfather, who's passed away, was a Cowboy fan. So it worked out great for me.
Following the Steelers, one of the guys who had good success and was extremely gritty was Rocky Blyer. And, one of those smaller stature guys, did he relate to you? Were you able to relate to him?
I was always. Actually, I had an opportunity to meet Rocky at this past year's Pro Football Hall of Fame. And just a guy who was, just think about all the stuff that he went through, Vietnam and all the stuff like that. I mean, you look at a guy, and I just happened to be with my brother-in-law, and he was like, oh my God, you know what that guy did over his career? I mean, and we're not talking football. It's just what he went through, and then got to the professional ranks of going through Vietnam. It was something special, and for my brother-in-law to remember something like that, you can tell that the guy was a special person, not only on the field but off the field too.
At the book here, Marv Levy, where else would you rather be than right here, right now?
San Diego? No, go ahead. Okay, nah. Well, you asked me, so there it was. Okay. Yeah, okay.
I mean, here you are in Lakewood, New York. It doesn't get any better than that. Come on. What? When I look at this picture and you see both Bruce and you see Marv, what's that mean to you, to a Thurman Thomas?
That's the type of team that we were.
Yeah.
We never pointed the fingers at it was your fault or it was his fault or anybody else's fault. We grew up as a team. We grew up as young players trying to achieve one goal, which was trying to win the Super Bowl. And even though we didn't achieve that goal, we remained very close friends. Now, anytime that you can go to Jim Kelly's tournament that he has here in Buffalo, you see anywhere from 30 to 40 former players that were on all 4 Super Bowls. And that's how we keep in touch. I keep in touch with Jim and Bruce and Andre, and we all keep in touch with the others. I mean, it was a family atmosphere, and I still think today at this moment that even that teams that won the Super Bowl, I still don't think that they're as close as we are. And I can go on record as saying that.
Though that wasn't always the case. I mean, even in Marv's book, at one point he has a title called "The Bickering Bills." As you were kind of coming together for that Super Bowl year.
Right.
Was that a maturing process for?
I think it was a maturing process for all of us, because if you get a great head coach, not everything's going to really come together at the first year.
Yeah.
Because he's going to try to decide, okay, what type of personality does this guy have? What type of personality does this guy have? And it all has to get together. And like Bill Polian and John Butler and them guys said, I was always kind of the missing piece. They had the defense, they had the wide receivers, they just didn't have the running back. And once I got there and felt comfortable around these guys, and I've always been an outspoken guy about it because I've always been team oriented. And I know Jim Kelly was, he was the head dog in Buffalo, no doubt about it. He was a guy that everybody looked up to. But I just felt deep down inside from all the teams that I was on, even in high school, junior high, and college, that just wasn't the way to go for it, about talking about your teammates and stuff like that. So even though I did call out Jim Kelly back in 1989, I think it was something that was needed. I think it was something that really helped that football team. And if you look at the last game of the season that we played against the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs, you notice all the guys holding hands on the sideline. And I think at that point, even though we lost a football game, it was something that we can build on, knowing that, okay, we have a better football team than this. We can play together as a team without the big egos of myself, Bruce, Jim, Andre, whoever was on that football team. Marv Levy was the guy that made it work. And, yeah, we went through our trying times, but I think every team in a National Football League, when you have so many great players on one time, I think you do go through trying times.
Personally, you had such a tremendous career in so many aspects of it, but I know you've referenced Jimmy Brown many times, and really a highlight with that. For the tape, what was that you achieved?
You know, to even be mentioned in the same sentence with the Jim Brown, and I know Jim Brown held the record of leading the league in consecutive yards from scrimmage 3 years in a row. And, you know, even when I got to 2, people were saying, well, you're 1 away from Jim Brown, from tying this record. And when I got to that record, they were like, well, if you lead it this year, you can break Jim Brown's record. And that to me was just like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
I mean, probably the best player who could have played at any time, even today, years past, 20 years from now, could probably still play. Because every time I see him at the Hall of Fame, you look at him and go, wow, that's Jim Brown. And you still don't want to mess with him. You still don't want to say anything to him because he's that intimidating.
Right.
And just a player who, I think when you think about the great running backs to come throughout the National Football League, you talk about Barry, you talk about Emmett, Marshall Faulk, O.J., Franco Harris, you know, the one name that people always seem to mention is Jim Brown. And there's a reason for that, because he was probably not only the most dominant running back to play the game, but probably the most dominant player to ever play the game.
Well, you mentioned 2 names right there. One was Emmitt Smith, and when people talk about the all 90s decade team, there's Thurman Thomas and there's Emmitt Smith. I mean, that's pretty heady company for us to be in your presence, frankly. And I know you probably don't think those terms, but that's pretty nifty.
It is pretty nifty, but like you said, I don't think of it as in them terms. I think about what I did for the Buffalo Bills and not what I could have done for the Cowboys or the Detroit Lions, because when you mention that myself and Emmett, you always have to mention Barry Sanders. So, you know what, it's one of those deals where I did what I could for the Buffalo Bills and never saw myself in another situation as being with the Detroit Lions or with the Dallas Cowboys. I did what I had to do as a Buffalo Bill, and I always talk to Emmett and Barry about, you know, Barry played 8 games indoors. Emmett played in Texas where there's pretty much good weather year-round, and in Buffalo, you know, I maybe got 5 games in that were good weather games. So exactly. So, you know, when I talk to those guys, I always tell them, you know what, I probably lost about 3,000 or 4,000 yards just playing in weather like that. So I could be right up there at the beginning, right up there at the top of the list, but I had to play, as you can see, people out there
fishing.
Ice fishing or whatever the hell they doing out there. I don't know.
And we're hoping they succeed, because that's what tonight is. Barry Sanders was your understudy at Oklahoma State, and he really attributes much of his success to learning from you.
Well, I would probably say that's probably 75% true, because when we were in college together for 3 years, he always sat next to me, and he was a guy who could fall asleep standing up. And so I always had to hit him on the side to say, hey, you need to watch this or whatever. So I would probably say 75% of that is true, but the other 25% was pretty much Barry doing it on his own. Coming out of Kansas, not really a lot of people knowing him, but you know, it helped me throughout my career, because I always felt like this was a guy who was after my job in college. You know, if we ran 10 100-yard sprints, I had to run 11. I had to always stay one step ahead of him. And I tell people all the time, like I said, if he ran 10 wind sprints, I ran 11. If he did 10 bench press at 225, I had to do 11. If he went to school, went to his first class at 6:30 in the morning, I went to mine at 10:30 in the morning. So it was always that difference that he had kept me on edge. So it was I attributed a lot of my success to him pushing me throughout my career.
Bill Polian has often remarked about Thurman Thomas as the smartest player he's ever had under contract, and so you knew more about the offense and studied it harder. If Jim Kelly went down, you probably figured you could run the place. Is that something innate that you've had all your life, or is that something you grew into, this knowledge base of everything that's going around you?
I've had that always, even through junior high and high school and in college. I knew a lot of the plays, even at college. Even when we had a lot of defensive backs that went down, my coach at that time, Pat Jones, who was my coach at Oklahoma State, he would practice me at defensive back because he knew I knew the plays. I knew all the signals. I knew cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. I knew all that stuff because coming out of the great state of Texas, I was recruited as a defensive back by the University of Texas, and at that time they were like the defensive back school that you wanted to go to if you wanted to go that way. So I just always felt like it was always my duty to learn every single position out there, no matter what. Because if there was a position that I could play, say defensive back or cornerback or even quarterback, just from not throwing the football, but maybe if Jim got hurt or Frank got hurt, just so me knowing that, okay, I can get under center and I can tell Kenny Davis, who was my backup, who I think to this day that I probably would not be able to get the yards that I've gotten over my career. With him being back there, it was very special to me that I can get under center and be right there with Ken Hall and know the plays. Probably couldn't throw the ball, but I knew which way to hand it off.
Receiving, running, blocking, I mean, you had the full package. As you were prepared,
that's what my wife tells me, but go ahead.
we got that insight from her. She called while you were on the way down. She said, ask the question. I don't understand why. When you go out there game after game, and whether you're playing the Steelers, the Raiders, whoever, I mean, were there certain guys on certain teams that you said, oh my God, I really got to ratchet this up because somebody's the middle linebacker out there? And was there certain individuals that you knew you had to kind of bring your A-plus game to?
No, I felt that with everybody.
Everybody?
Yeah, and there was no special individual or no special football player that I felt I had to bring my A game. I mean, even during the preseason, and even through training camp, I felt like, hey, this is the guy on the other side of the ball who is trying to make this football team. Well, on the flip side of that too, every year is a year where you have to try to make the football team. And that was my job, whether it was preseason or training camp. I figured every year I had to try to make that opportunity to make the football team. I didn't take it for granted that, I was going to be on the football team this coming up year. I went at it like I was a rookie. Like I wanted to teach other guys the way to go about making it in the National Football League instead of them guys teaching me the way. I've always felt that way. It was nothing that was never said to me. I just went at it that hard. It wasn't a particular team or a particular player. Every time I put that uniform on, it was all business to me, and that's the way I think a lot of players should take it. There's so much stuff going on right now with these players. I think today are just worried about being out there. Well, to me it takes a lot bit more than being out there. You got to go on that football field. You got to perform week in and week out, whether it's preseason or regular season or training camp.
I'm going to give you some name. We're going to do some name recognition now. And I recently had down here the trainer for Ever and a Day, Eddie Abramowski. And I showed him football cards, one after another. And I gave him Thurman Thomas, and he reacted to you. How would you act if I gave you Eddie Abramowski's football card? What would you say about Eddie?
Oh, wow. Well, the first thing that come to my mind would be pigeons.
That's right.
That would be the first thing that come to my mind, because I saw him the other night at Jim Kelly's surprise party, and the first thing I said to him was, how the pigeons doing? Because, he flies pigeons. He's a professional pigeon flyer. Well, basically, to me, he's a professional shit flyer. But, a funny guy. You know what? I mean, he throughout the week, he was like a player. He was serious about if you had an injury, what did you need to do to get yourself prepared as a football player. But then again, on game day, he was like this madman who, I think at that time when I first got there in 1988, if you went trainer on trainer, Abe probably would have beat the crap out of the other 30 trainers in the league, because Abe was a big guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a big guy, and he was a guy who loved football, and he always said to me, you may think that you're a tough guy, and I always remember him saying this, you may think you're a tough guy, but I know somebody who was tougher than you. And I'm like, hey, there's nobody that was tougher than me. And he always would say Cookie Gilchrist. He always would say Cookie Gilchrist. I've never met Cookie since I've been here since 1988. But Abe talks about him as him being not only one of the great players that never got the recognition that he deserved. And for me to hear that from Abe and to wear 34, and that's the number that Cookie wore, I speak highly of Abe, and definitely always will speak highly of Cookie Gilchrist, because Abe was a guy who saw him play. And I never got to see him play, and there's a lot of people in Buffalo who did get to see him play, and they say the same things. Now, anytime that you can have, when Cookie can be out, and they say, you got to come to this bar, Cookie is fighting, and they're talking to the police, and the police say, no, you handle that on your own self. That's a powerful man right there, if the policemen do not want to handle you. So I've always looked up to Cookie, even though I haven't met him before.
Well, he's not been back to Buffalo in many years, just as well. Our area, we lay claim to a guy named Shane Conlon. What's he mean to Thurman Thomas?
Oh, Shane Conlon. Oh, I used to kick Shane ass every day. Oh, man. He was a rookie of the year and all that stuff, but Shane was a great guy. Me and Shane used to always, when I first got there in 1988, the first thing I noticed about Shane was that, he had these little calves. He got these little calves about that big. And I got little calves too, but mine was always bigger than Shane. But he had this enormous head on him. I mean, his head was huge. And, obviously coming from Penn State, which is, a linebacker, which they called back then. So it was great to go against a guy like that. He was one of those guys who I went up against in training camp a lot. And I think, with naming Shane Conlon, Darryl Talley, Cornelius Bennett, and those guys, those guys are really the ones that made me pretty much a ball player that I was today, as far as picking up blitzes, as far as coming out of the backfield, running routes and stuff like that, because you had three different guys. Shane was a guy that was going to kind of bully you with his strength. Cornelius was a guy who was very, very quick, that could try to run around you, and Darryl was just a smart linebacker. You didn't know if he was going to run around you, run over you, or do whatever. So, but Shane Conlon and those guys were really a big part of my career as far as growing up as a football player, as a running back position.
Darryl Talley was pretty shy on the sidelines. What's your impression of that?
Pretty shy. You kidding me, right? Wait a minute. If you kidding me, right? Any guy that says when we're behind against Houston 35-3, and he gathers up everybody on the sideline and goes, all right, we have them right where we want them right now. Any guy that says that, are you kidding me? And we're down 35-3? No. And he gathers up everybody on the sideline and says, all right, we got them right where we want them now. And we go out to proceed to, win the football game in overtime, 41-38, But that was, besides all the things that happened in that comeback game against Houston, that's the one thing that jumps off is at the top of my head. And it's not even Christie kicking the field goal, or Frank Wright throwing the touchdown pass to Andre Reed, or covering the onside kick. It's Darryl Talley saying those words that really hits home with what our team was all about back then.
You were scrimmaging, and you had guys like Bruce Smith on the other side.
Bruce never scrimmaged.
He didn't scrimmage?
No.
He was just at a certain level. He just showed up.
No, he was usually faking an injury by then. But go ahead. Bruce never went to training camp or whatever. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, then we'll move beyond. Yeah. What about the biscuit? Tell me, what's Cornelius? What did he mean to the team? He sort of came on a team from the trade from Indianapolis. Was that really a big impetus for the team?
No, well, I think it was, because I think that at that point in time, that was kind of the second big move that Bill Polian had made. His first move was getting Jim Kelly and Ken Hall to come to the Buffalo Bills, and then him making that trade for Cornelius. I think he traded Greg Bell, and then Eric Dickerson got traded to the Colts. So, and at that time, Cornelius was a great linebacker coming out of Alabama, and I think one of the stories that Abe always tells me is that first game that he ever played against was against Denver, I think it was, and him coming out and just within like 2 or 3 days of practice and just harassing John Elway all over the field, and really ended it that year with I think he had like 17 tackles and 4 sacks against Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that was key. And I think that's really another stepping stone of Bill Polian taking his knowledge of football and going and get a player who was the second pick of the draft that year behind Vinny Testaverde, who could not sign a contract with the Colts, who are obviously known for not kind of signing that, because they didn't sign John Elway. So, I thought that was a huge deal of getting him because, you know what, he can play every position. He can be a rush defensive end, he can be an inside linebacker or outside linebacker, and he had that speed and he had that ability to do everything on the football field that was asked of him.
You were a second-round draft pick your year, and I'm sure you felt that coming out of college that you probably should have been a first-round draft pick. Was that a big disappointment to you?
Well, it was a big disappointment, knowing that a lot of the teams that were talking about taking me were first-round teams. They had a pick in the first round. New Orleans, Chicago, Houston. You know, those were the teams that I was talking to, and they continue to say that, you know, if you're available at that point in time, we're going to take you in the first round. And, you know, as the first round went by and they didn't draft me, you know what, it was just one of those things where I just decided, you know what, just whatever team draft me is going to, you know, I'm going to put my heart and soul into that football team, and the Bills just happened to be that team because they didn't have a first-round draft pick because of the draft of Cornelius Bennett, well, the trade that Bill Polian made with the Colts, so they didn't have a first-round draft pick. So to me to fall back into the second round to a football team that was up and coming, I think it was the best thing that could ever happen to me.
What's Elijah Pitts mean to you?
Well, I wouldn't be sitting right here across from this table if it wasn't for Elijah. When you talk about the stories of him being with Coach Vince Lombardi, him going to the first couple of Super Bowls, winning those things, how Vince Lombardi really pushed him as a football player, and he wasn't the most talented football player on that football team, but you had Bart Starr, Willie Davis, and Buchanan, and all those guys, you listen to his stories. And one of the first things that he ever taught me was to how to pick up defensive backs and linebacker blitzing. I think that was the biggest thing that he taught me, because I wasn't the biggest guy in the world. I was always outweighed by at least 40 or 50 pounds, but he taught me the correct technique to pick up blitzes and really how to handle yourself after a football game, how to rejuvenize your body to get it right back to where you want it to be before the week runs out. Big part of my life. The reason why I played 13 years. The reason why I had all the success that I had throughout my career. Just an unbelievable guy, and just a guy who, had he not passed away, would have, in my mind, 100% would have been a head coach in the National Football League.
Is that something you would like to do? I mean, here you are deemed to be really one of the smartest guys to play in the league. Would you like to be in the world of coaching?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be in the world of coaching. I would rather be a scout or somebody who looks over free agency, or in the National Football League, or in college. I've talked to Buddy Nix. I've talked to Tom Modrak, Chan Gailey about some of the stuff that I would like to, help the Bills at. I don't want to go over there and be the guy or whatever, because I never considered myself as the guy, whether I was in junior high, high school, college, or the pros. I was always wanting to help out. And, the last 10 years has not gone well for the Buffalo Bills. And I've talked to those guys over there, and I'm having a meeting next week with Buddy Nix, and see where we can go from there. I just want to be a part of kind of like rebuilding the Buffalo Bills, and not be the main guy, but I just want to help, and they know that. I moved back to Buffalo 3 years ago, and that's why I want to see this team back on top, going to the playoffs, competing for the AFC East title year after year.
We got Time Warner here would like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Making it the pinnacle of the Hall of Fame, NFL Hall of Fame, the local Hall of Fames, how important is it to recognize local athletes for their standout abilities and what they've done in their local careers?
Oh, it's definitely important. That's one of the reasons why I moved back to Buffalo 3 years ago. I've opened up 2 gyms in Buffalo, Thurman Thomas Sports Training, and that's what I do. We help young athletes and older athletes train to reach their maximum ability. And so I, even when I was here, when I was playing, it wasn't always a situation where, high school sports or high school athletes weren't getting a lot of attention. But now that I've moved back, that's my main goal, to try to get these kids. I love the colleges around here, UB, Buff State, and all those. But you know what? I want to try to expand it more. I would love to see kids go to UCLA, USC, Michigan. That's what I want to do. I want Oklahoma State too. University of Florida, where my daughter goes. I would love to see the kids expand. And so they have a lot of different choices to decide when these college coaches come in here looking for them to see, okay, well, I've did this for 3 years. This is where I'm at. What do you think about me playing at your division, at your school?
The importance of expanding with Turner Gill, is he the right step, having an African American head coach in an inner city, expanding out to a Kansas?
When you talk about being an African American coach or whatever, I just think if you find the right coach for the right job, whether he's black, white, Asian, or whatever fits that college, whatever fits that community is great. I know there's always been a lot of talk about where we don't have enough African American coaches or what have you. But if he's the best fit for Kansas, then so be it. Then that's where he needs to be. And if he can move on and build that program and go to another college higher than that, or USC or something like that, that's good for the program, that's good for the community. I just don't see it as being something that we should always look at as saying, what type of color of person we should have. It's what type of person you should have at that college that makes the college.
Thurman, favorite game
you played in during your Bills career? You have one that you replay. I know you didn't play in the game against the Oilers because you were hurt.
Yeah.
I think about the first Super Bowl. I think you should have been the MVP of that game.
You know what? It's I really can't say whether it's, it could be that game or it could be my first game against Minnesota, my rookie year, the regular season game. I mean, that was almost like, okay, I made it. I get to at least play a year in the National Football League until, my last game with the Dolphins. So, I mean, there's so many games in between and over the course of my career, you just can't really, I can't really say that which one was the best, but I think if I had to point out one, it would probably be against the Raiders, going to the first Super Bowl, beating them 51-3. I mean, even from college, I was never in that situation before where we had won at that time the Big 8, and this was like our first trip going to the Super Bowl, which, you see Mr. Wilson up there happy and how everything came together, the fans. So I think if it had to be one game, it would probably be that one, just to get to that first opportunity to try to win the Super Bowl.
Obviously, a historian of the game. What will the legacy of, or what is Thurman Thomas' legacy to the Bills and to the NFL?
You know what? Ever since I moved back there 3 years ago, I don't think it might not have nothing to do with football. To be honest with you, it could be, but I think I'm just trying to take it a little step farther. There's always been speculation or whispers about the Bills possibly maybe leaving, and if I can be a part of that, Jim Kelly's group of keeping the Bills here, I think that's the biggest one of all, but that's remain to be seen. So I'm going to say, you did threw me off with talking, but go ahead.
What's it like to speak for someone else's moment, though? Just being a Hall of Fame inductee of the Pro Football Hall of Fame yourself, what's it like to induct someone else or help induct someone else into a Hall of Fame?
Well, it's a special moment, without a doubt. I mean, I'm in 8 Hall of Fames, so they never get bored. Anytime you mention the words Hall of Fame, it's always something special. So I don't mind it. I know what that person is going through. I mean, it's obviously a big honor for them and for all the people that have been involved throughout their lives. It's something that the people that have helped them with, and it's just a big honor for whoever's going in.
Thank you, Thurman. Terrific.
All right, thank you, man.
Terrific.